In this corner, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time, the Super Nintendo beat-em-up based on the arcade smash hit. In the other corner, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles The Hyperstone Heist, a console-exclusive brawler that brought the Turtles to the Genesis for the very first time. These are two of the most popular beat-em-ups of all time, and an important part of the Genesis vs. Super NES console war. But what did the critics say 32 years ago? Wasn't this hotly contested, or was there a clear winner in the 16-bit showdown? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Mean Machines, GamePro, and more classic magazines that reviewed both of these brawlers back when they first came out. Today we're going to see where the critics landed and maybe, just maybe, settle this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles debate once and for all in this pizza-loving episode of Magazine Matchup.
This is Cowabungie, and this is Cowabungo.
But the turtles for your 16-bit system are Cowabunga! Holy cow, it's Turtles in Time! The cool arcade game for Super NES, now with tasty turtle duels. And psych up your Sega Genesis with the Hyperstone Heist and all new 3D Turtle Thrash. So remember,
This is Cowabungo.
but the turtles for Super NES and Sega Genesis are...
Cowabunga, dude.
Before we dive into the actual matchup, we first need to talk about the timing of these two Turtles games. After Sega shocked pretty much everybody with a surprisingly strong lineup in 1991 that included everything from Sonic the Hedgehog to Streets of Rage to Toe Jam and Earl, Nintendo countered in 1992 with two back-to-back arcade hits that you could only get on the Super NES, Street Fighter II and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. Of course, both of these franchises would end up hitting the Genesis just 1 year later as both Capcom and Konami signed on to be official Sega third parties, but by that point, the damage had been done. Now, with that context in mind, let's go ahead and turn to Electronic Gaming Monthly, who loved Turtles in Time when it first hit the Super Nintendo in 1991. In fact, they loved the game so much that in pretty much any other issue, it would have been the game of the month, but it had the unfortunate luck of being reviewed right next to the almighty Street Fighter II. Still, even without fireballs and spinning pile drivers, I think it's fair to say that the Turtles were able to hold their own, earning a score of 9 out of 10. Steve called it, quite honestly, the best side-scrolling action game to appear on the Super NES so far. This game is perfectly presented and executed with flawless detail. Besides virtually duplicating the arcade title, Turtles 4 also delivers some of the best graphics you'll ever find at home. A truly great game that's a tad easy. Now, fast forward 6 months, and the Turtles return with the Hyperstone Heist, a beat-em-up for the Genesis with a new story that incorporates both original and recycled levels. EGM was excited to be playing a new Turtles game, but the editors were disappointed with some of the cuts that were made to get it on the Genesis, ultimately giving this version a lower 7.75 out of 10. Martin complained that there are quite a few things missing from this version that made the Super NES version so good. You can't hurl the enemies towards the screen, and the gameplay has less to offer in terms of moves. This is still one of the better Genesis carts around. The game is also too easy in the two-player mode. While EGM ended up liking both of these games, there was a clear winner in this matchup. Turtles in Time takes the first point. While the British critics definitely liked their hero Turtles, they weren't as enamored as the American press. Mean Machines ended up giving the Hyperstone Heist a solid 83%, calling it a good beat-em-up that's too shallow and too easy to be great. They explained that the Turtles look great, the sprites really capture the look of their cartoon counterparts. The fighting animations are also ace. There's also an endless onslaught of action, but the game isn't always challenging. There are too many continues and too much life-restoring pizza scattered around. A shame, as Turtles could have been a classic. Now, when we go back to the Super NES review, we find another mixed take on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Giving Turtles in Time a slightly lower score of 80%, the appropriately named Rad called this one of the most impressive looking games on the Super NES yet. However, there are some clouds looming over the daintily colored horizon that is TMNT 4. The main problem is that it's all pretty much the same all the way through, so once you get about 3/4 of the way through the game, your attention starts to wander. The other problem is that it's easy, and experienced players should be able to beat it in a couple of days. If you're likely to have a second player around all the time and fancy some groovy beat-em-up thrills, this is definitely a title to seek out. Sadly, lonesome players should think about renting it for a weekend before purchasing TMNT. And with that, we're all tied up again. One for the Genesis and one for the Super NES. Let's see how the next matchup goes. Over at GamePro, they did the thing that they're best known for, and that's giving both games extremely high scores. In fact, they gave the Super NES game Turtles in Time the highest score they could, a perfect 5 out of 5. If non-stop hack and slashing is your thing and you love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, get this cart. This Super NES game is better than the arcade counterpart overall, despite the coin-op's great 4-player buy-in. All the bosses are straight out of the comics. Plus, you get 2 additional fighting scenes, and you don't have to feed it tokens. If you're still pondering a 16-bit commitment to Nintendo, this cart may make up your mind. Is this a great game? Do Turtles have lips? Oh, how on earth can the Genesis compete with a perfect score? Well, they can't. But to be fair, the Hyperstone Heist isn't that far behind with a score of 4.5 out of 5. They explained that the Hyperstone Heist brings excellent arcade quality graphics, sound, and gameplay to your home unit. The variety of options guarantees fun and challenge for gamers of all ages and abilities. Although the storyline and objectives are simple, there are plenty of moves and challenges to make you spin in your shell. The Turtles make a big splash for Konami in their Genesis debut. Yeah, that was a close fight, but the Super NES game breaks the tie and once again puts Turtles in Time back up on top. For the next 2 matchups, we're going to be looking at sibling publications, that is, console-specific magazines that are from the same publisher. Up first, we have N-Force and Sega Force, 2 short-lived early 90s publications from Europress Impact. Much like fellow British magazine Mean Machines, the Force critics weren't quite as in love with the Turtles as their American counterparts. Sega Force gave the Hyperstone Heist a solid score of 81%, joking that nobody cared about the Turtles in 1993. Cow in a bunker! Or something? It's been so long since the Turtles craze was at its height, I'd almost forgotten about them. Konami is late to jumping on the Mega Drive bandwagon and should have chosen a more current cartoon coin-op for their first cart. But TMNT is a playable little number all the same. For all its failings, TMNT is a highly likable beat-em-up. It's bright, hectic, has bonuses to collect, and more moves than you'd imagine. For wacky bash-em-up action and authentic cartoon graphics, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is hard to beat. Now, to be fair, that 81% for the Genesis version isn't all that far off from what the rest of the critics thought, so Turtles in Time probably blew that score away, right? Nope! N-Force actually went the opposite direction, giving the Super NES game an average score of 75%, which is quite a bit lower than the rest of the magazines. Sporting bright, cartoony graphics, energetic music, and fast, smooth animation, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 has a lot to attract action freaks. It's nothing new, with repetitive gameplay which seriously reduces lastability, but well worth a few plays. And with that, we're once again tied. 2 for the Genesis, and that's right, 2 for the Super Nintendo. We'll see if the next pair of sibling publications can give us a real winner after this break.
Once upon a time in the sewer, there were 4 cute little turtles.
Who suddenly went through this incredible mutation process and became the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
And then there was a sweet, charming rock musician.
Who goes out of control, changes and mutates into bebop.
Oh, my. Look, they've decided to play together. And of course, they all live happily ever after.
Now then.
Fun playmates.
Now, much like N-Force and Sega Force, Mega Play and Super NES Buyer's Guide were two console-exclusive magazines from Electronic Gaming Monthly's parent company, Sendai Publishing. When Mega Play got their hands on the Hyperstone Heist, they gave it an average score of 84%, with Bart summing it up this way: "This is one of the best action games for the Genesis. Colorful graphics and a decent set of tunes keep things interesting. The game is kinda short and way too easy for 2 players. While 84% is definitely a good score, it's no match for the 9 out of 10 average that Super NES Buyer's Guide gave Turtles in Time. Really, this is what we've seen from all the American magazines. They like the Genesis game, but they love the Super NES title. Dude, yes, Dude, explains that Turtles in Time is easily one of the best looking, best playing games that I've ever gotten my hands on. The graphic detail and animation are unbelievable. The music is top notch, and those with hi-fi stereo will love the bassy sound effects. Though a bit too easy, the gameplay is great as you add 2 players with almost no slowdown. Now don't let the slightly different grading style distract you from the fact that the Super NES definitely came out on top on this sibling publication matchup. That puts Turtles in Time ahead by just 1 point as we go into the lightning round, where anything can happen. Based on the magazines we've matched up so far, it's clear that the American critics prefer Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo, while the British critics opted for the Hyperstone Heist on the Genesis. But what about the German magazines? Where did they land on these 2 titles? Well, if you're hoping that Playtime will give us a decisive victor, then think again, because both of these games earned the exact same score, 86%. Yep, it's a tie. Over at Octuler Software Markt, or ASM, which is a whole lot easier to say, they prefer the Genesis over the Super Nintendo, giving the Hyperstone Heist a 9 out of 12 and Turtles in Time an 8 out of 12. That may not sound like a big difference, but it's basically 75% to 67%. Yikes, that's the lowest score that we've seen for any of these Turtles games. With everything tied up again, let's go ahead and check in with German magazine Power Play. They preferred the Super NES game, but not by much. Power Play gave Turtles in Time an 80%, while the Hyperstone Heist lags slightly behind with a 76%. They complained that both games are too easy and too repetitive. They didn't seem that interested in Turtles as teenagers, mutants, or ninjas. And finally, the generically named magazine Video Games, which is not to be confused with the pompously named magazine Video Games, the Ultimate Gaming Magazine, gave the Super NES game a 79% and the Genesis a 71%, giving us a knockout blow. This means that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time on the Super NES takes the win over Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles The Hyperstone Heist on the Genesis by a score of 6-4. I will admit that that's a lot closer than I expected, but the Europeans really pushed things in Sega's favor, but not enough to actually pull out the win though. And with that, there's really only one thing left to say, and that's cow in a bunker. No, wait, that's not right.
We are Ninja Turtles. We are
가면 닌자 선정호 슈퍼 파미콘 TMNT
Konami.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we have a whole magazine matchup series. We've already done Sonic vs. Mario, Aladdin vs. Aladdin, and even Ghouls and Ghosts vs. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. The last one's barely 2 weeks old. I recommend you check those out if you have a few minutes and like this sort of thing. Now, here's the question I have for you. Which Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles brawler is better? Turtles in Time or the Hyperstone Heist? Look, I have a strong opinion here, but I don't want to sway your decision. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back later this week with a review of the second Atari 50 expansion pack, the first console war. Hey, that kind of fits in with what we're doing here. Why wait for that? I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.